Welcome, everyone. If this is your first time joining, I'm Sarah Powell. I'm the founder of Impactury, and I used to work in kind of tech and nonprofit consulting for Accenture, and then I was the chief operating officer of the last company that I worked at, but I decided to quit and really be vulnerable, start leading courageously, and start my dream business, which is Impactury. So we offer eco-luxury wellness retreats to women executives who are seeking more purpose and less stress in their lives. And we also host virtual events like this, where we bring insights to you that truly can change your life. And we do this for free, thanks to our incredible coaching partners like Roxanne today. Before we jump into the event, like always, I just want to take a minute to get present. So you can close your eyes for this if you want. Just take a deep breath in and breathe out, letting go of whatever was going on before this session, not worrying about whatever's happening after. We can just be here in this moment together. Okay, you can go ahead and open your eyes. So thank you so much for including Impactury on your journey towards living a life of more purpose and less stress, and also just for investing an hour of your time into learning about courageous leadership. This is all based on Brené Brown's research. And if this is your first exposure to Brené Brown, you are in for a treat. Brené Brown, she is a queen, changed my life. But she really opened my eyes to a new way of being. And she has a lot of different books. Dare to Lead is one of them, which is what this presentation is based off of. But my first exposure was The Gifts of Imperfection. Cannot recommend that enough, especially if you're kind of high performing, anxiety, perfection, like go get that book. It really did change my life. And that book really showed me how to love and accept myself so that I could start showing up authentically and get more comfortable with the discomfort of vulnerability. And so now when difficult decisions need to be made, I can really stay connected to my values, and I operate from a place of self-awareness instead of self-protection, kind of shutting down, running away, those kinds of things. And to me, this is true leadership. I don't think it's something that you have just because you hold a senior position. And kind of operating this way is something that I thought that people were born with. It's like you're born with it or you're not, but actually courage is something that you can learn, and it's a muscle that can be built. And when you actually start leading courageously, what you're able to do as a leader is create safe spaces for your team so they can trust, innovate, and really learn. So today I am super excited to be partnering with Roxanne. She's a certified Brené Brown facilitator. She was named Top 100 Champions for Good, former managing partner of a top agency. She's just all around impressive and very inspiring woman. So thank you so much for spending your time with us today, Roxanne. I'm going to hand it off to you now.
Thank you so much. Really excited to be here, and this is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm going to have fun as well. If you flip over the slides, someone else is leading the slides, so there will be a kind of a next slide, please, as we go through this. Right, first of all, let me introduce you all to Brené. I really hope no one came today hoping to see Brené and they're not disappointed with Roxanne instead. It's really funny. One of the things Brené does is write herself little permission slips to kind of support her in showing up in different and kind of, I guess, vulnerable situations. And the one I always have to write to myself is, it's okay not to be Brené, because she's such a queen. It's like, oh God, it's just me. But I have my own strengths and I bring those to you today. Funny story, I first came across Brené's work as part of a wedding present. Someone bought me as a gift a ticket to see her speak in Conway Hall in London. And I had what I call a sliding doors moment in my life, because I think everything changed after that moment. I'd already trained as a coach, and I just saw someone on stage who was so eloquent, talking about all the crazy thoughts that had been going through my head, but I hadn't managed to articulate. But even better, she had research and data that sat behind it. And one of my struggles with coaching as I was getting trained is they teach you how to do it, but they don't always teach you the theory that sits behind it. And what I loved about what Brené was bringing to the table was the data, the research. I really loved that part of it. So the TED Talk, The Power of Vulnerability, is awesome. If you haven't seen that, go and watch it straight after we finish today. It's all about kind of being all in and really going for it. And what happened after that is loads of people emailed her and were like, well, I went for that new job, or I said I love you to my partner, and it all went wrong. Now I'm down on the floor. Now what the hell am I supposed to do? And she realized that she needed to write something about resilience. So that's what Rising Strong was. And really the thought is, if you're going to be brave with your life, you will fall on the floor sometimes. It's not that you're going to increase the chances, you will. Brave in the Wilderness, it seems a bit of an anomaly in this journey, but for me, I see that as her response to what was happening in America around the time when Donald Trump got elected. But Dare to Lead is, well, you've just bought it, haven't you? Sarah's just bought it in like a massive copy. The way Brené describes it is, it's as though daring greatly and rising strong got together and had a baby, and then that baby went to business school, and that's Dare to Lead. So it's all of the research, but packaged up in a much more corporate and professional kind of manner. Next slide. And what Dare to Lead pulls apart is, what is courageous leadership? So I'm going to take you through these skill sets today, but I want to just give you a little bit more background first. So next slide. When she started this research, she went into organizations, and it was very US focused, but and she has been challenged on that, but she has been going into organizations more kind of globally since, but asking, what's the future of leadership? Who's going to be standing in 5 years? And what happens in qual research is you keep going until you get to that saturation point, and they got to saturation like so quickly because everybody was saying, we need more courage, we need braver leaders, we need people who can rehumanize work. And this sense that, and you know, she wrote this before the pandemic, but she was saying even back in 2019, like, the world is changing faster than ever before. That's not going to shift. We need leaders who are able to kind of be with that change. And as Sarah said right at the beginning, when we're in the face of that uncertainty or vulnerability, what we need those leaders to do is keep the armor off. Some of us, when we feel that fear, go armor up and try and protect ourselves in those situations. But the brave leaders are the ones that are able to keep that armor off and stay human through the face of that. So really quickly, she found this: we need people who can be courageous. And then she found that if you said to someone, what is courageous leadership? And I guess I can't really ask you now because we've shown you some of the skill sets, but people really struggled to answer what is courageous leadership. And they would say things like, well, it's kind of innate. Some people have got it, some people haven't. You know, it's about being brave. What does that mean? And it was a question they really struggled with. And if you noticed in that, there's a limiting belief. If you think that courageous leadership is something innate, like some people have it, some people don't, that doesn't give you or anybody else the capacity to learn that. And she found the opposite actually is true, that it is observable, measurable, and teachable. So courageous leadership is observable, measurable, and teachable, and that's the heart of Dare to Lead, because it teaches those skill sets. Next slide. Really quickly, oh, that's a beautiful picture there, isn't it? Sarah's very kindly put some really beautiful pictures behind my slides. When we're talking about leadership today, well, and always, if you're me, we're not talking about the C-suites or the corner office. We believe that everybody has the capacity to be a leader. And I love the Peter Drucker quote: management is doing things right, leadership is doing the right thing. So I come back to that time and time again. And I think this is why a lot of women in particular struggle with vulnerability, I suppose, in the workplace, because I think, this is me in my mid-20s, I would be a bit perfectionist, a bit people pleaser-ish, and that kind of served me really well in those early stages of my career. And I got to like a good management level really quickly, and I could do things right really, really well. But then when I was trying to step into leadership and kind of think, well, what's the right thing to do here? It was kind of a grayer. There was less black and white. There was less certainty. There was more vulnerability. And I really struggled to make that shift. And that's why I think this quote is so helpful at framing vulnerability is absolutely critical to leadership, because there's no right answer. What is the right thing to do? Subjective, isn't it? It's not about colouring in the boxes beautifully and making everybody love you. It's about kind of working out where we want to go. Next slide. So what is courageous leadership? Go on to the next slide again. When she very first was investigating connection, researching connection between people again struggled with answering the question, what is connection? And the kind of breakthrough she had was when she asked people, what happens in the absence of connection? And so she thought to herself, oh, I'll do the same thing here. If people can't really answer what is courageous leadership, I'll ask, what happens in the absence of courageous leadership? And then it was like the floodgates opened and everybody had lots to say on that topic. So have a read through these. If you've got any other examples, please pop them in the chat box. What happens in the absence of courageous leadership? But, you know, in essence, trust gets corroded in organizations. We get stuck. There's no creativity. There's no innovation. Values become something that's like stuck above the door, but aren't kind of lived and breathed in the organization. The Hobbs consultancy, my business, is really focuses on tackling diversity, equity, and inclusion in organizations. So I have taken the liberty to add a bit of a diversity lens to this talk, because I think courageous leadership is absolutely fundamental to delivering on the diversity, equity, and inclusion agenda as well. Okie dokie. So I've already said this, it's observable, measurable, and teachable. And next slide shows that it consists of 4 different skill sets. Now, the Dare to Lead program in its entirety is 3 days, and we spend probably 1.5 days talking about vulnerability. It's like this kind of upside down Stonehenge. It's like vulnerability is the absolute basis of everything else that follows after it. We can't do the values piece, the trust piece, or the resilience piece without understanding vulnerability. So I thought today I will talk to you, I'll give you some of the key learnings about vulnerability. We'll dig into that one a little bit more. And she defines vulnerability as uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure. But there are 3 other skill sets as well. The second one, operationalizing values. What that means is it's so easy to profess your values, but what is hard is living those on a day-to-day basis. And think about that on an organizational level. Again, it's really easy to say this organization's about inclusion, as an example, but living and breathing that on a day-to-day basis, making decisions when it's going to piss people off when you make those decisions, that's hard, that's vulnerable work. Operationalizing trust, she found that the most courageous leaders were ones who knew how trust was built and how to rebuild that trust as well if things had gone wrong. That in essence, they knew how to operationalize trust. They were very intentional around their behaviors that built trust in their organizations. And finally, here's the kind of rising strong flavor comes in. If we are being courageous leaders, we will get it wrong sometimes. For me, being a diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant, I get it wrong, because if I was so worried about, let me back up, if I feel like I couldn't possibly get myself back up again if I mess up, I would not be able to have conversations in that space. So I need to know how to get myself up again so that I can be brave in the conversations that need to be had in organizations. So the same on any aspect of leadership. We need to accept that falling on our face is sometimes going to be a part of it. And I wouldn't say we're comfortable with that, or invite it, but we know it's not the end of the world. We know we'll be able to pick ourselves back up again. And I think the most courageous leaders actually know that there's huge learning and insight to be gained in those really difficult moments. So we're going to dig today a bit more into vulnerability and also into trust. If we get time, I've got a cool little like life hack on resilience to share with you, but we'll see how we get on. So vulnerability. The easiest way to start thinking about vulnerability is about what it's not. Because I think in our culture, and I mean Western culture really, we have internalized a lot of myths around vulnerability. And because of those myths, I think it makes it hard for us to be vulnerable. I was at an event this morning, actually, an advertising event, and I noticed there's been a real shift in the last 7 years. probably 50% of the speakers mentioned vulnerable leadership at the event. I really think it's getting critical momentum, that vulnerability is absolutely critical to leadership. 7 years ago, when I was doing Daring Greatly, I would have like stand-up discussions in the training room of people going, no, there's absolutely no place for vulnerability in the workplace. They just couldn't wrap their head around it. So huge shift kind of in the time that I've been doing this. But let's talk about the myths. Number one myth is vulnerability is weakness. So again, a lot of us have internalized this, and the data showed that vulnerability isn't weakness. It's in fact more closely correlated with courage. So if you think of something recently that you've done that is brave, I don't know, gosh, speaking to all of you, going to an IPA event this morning where I really get scared about networking and not knowing new people. It's like there will be some element of uncertainty, risk, and emotional exposure that you will have had to step into in order to step into your courage to do those things. And I think recognizing vulnerability as courage is such a step forward for this. There's another myth is I don't do vulnerability. Again, when I was running these workshops on vulnerability, I sometimes would get people going, it's great what you're doing, Rox, but I don't do vulnerability. It's not my thing, so I'm not going to come to that. There's a Madeleine Engel quote, which is, to be alive is to be vulnerable. It's like all of the things that we need as human beings, love, connection, creativity, the heart of those things require vulnerability. Like to be in relationship is to be vulnerable, because there's no certainties. There's no certainties in life, and we have to that's our conundrum as a human being, is that we have to walk that. The third myth is I can go it alone, and Brené calls this the white snake problem. And I must admit, I keep meaning to update that cultural reference because white snake are a big hair band from the 1980s, and they were like, here I go again on my own down the only path I've ever known. That's as close as you're going to get to me singing on Zoom. But I'd love a little like emoji from some of you if you recognize the cultural reference, or if you've got any ideas of up-to-date ones, please do let me know. But the idea is we have romanticized this notion of hyper-independence. We baked that into our culture, and actually as human beings, again thinking about our neurobiological wiring, we are wired to be in connection with other people, like spiritually, biologically. Everything about how our brain is wired is about being in connection with other people. Like babies don't thrive if they're not getting connection with other people. So we can't go it alone. It's not what we're built for. You can't engineer the uncertainty and risk out of vulnerability. This is a new myth that she's added in, because when she started doing this work, people were like, oh, it's great what you're doing. I'm just going to build a little app, which is going to allow me to be vulnerable without really feeling it. It is going to feel icky. Always. We're not going to get rid of that. And I definitely made the mistake early on of thinking, well, got it. It feels vulnerable. I need to do more of it. And then I'd be like standing on stage in front of 200 people going, oh my God, why am I so terrified? And I think I kind of forgot that, that feeling in your stomach that you get with it. Trust and vulnerability share a really interesting relationship. So like Sarah and I, when we first met each other, we might say, oh, I'm going to wait until we've got trust between us before I share anything vulnerable. But the problem is both of us are going to be waiting for a really long time if that was the case. And what actually happened, and as we were building our relationship, like Sarah shares a little bit about herself, I share a bit about myself, and it builds slowly and organically over time. And you can't hotwire that connection either. I've been to workshops where people are like, share something vulnerable about yourself right at the beginning in the hope of hotwiring that connection. It doesn't work. It's like too much, too soon. It's like it grows organically, and it's trust, vulnerability, trust, vulnerability. And that ties me nicely to the final myth about vulnerability being disclosure, because some people would go, haven't you seen Facebook? Have you not seen Twitter? There's way too much vulnerability. Everyone's sharing everything. And I'm going to paraphrase Brené here. She says, for the record, vulnerability isn't live tweeting your bikini wax. It is not about sharing the details of your imminent divorce on Facebook. That's not what vulnerability is. It's about sharing, but with people who've earned the right to hear your story. And also, I think with leadership, I have met really vulnerable leaders who disclose very little about their personal lives. And I have also met leaders who disclose a lot about their personal lives, but they aren't particularly vulnerable. So I think we really need to crack that myth as well. I think that was one of the early misinterpretations of her work. So whistle stop tour. Oh no, go back. We've got some sentence stems we want people to fill in. So whistle stop tour of vulnerability. I just want to do a little fun exercise which helps you to process this. So I'm going to start a sentence, and I want you to put in the chat box what you think comes next. So vulnerability is. Vulnerability is. Wonderful. Wonderful, thank you. Here's another one. Vulnerability feels like. Oh, I love these. So it's amazing for the people that it feels like courage, because I often have this kind of juxtaposition of, on sometimes it feels like that, but then sometimes it feels kind of overwhelming as well. And I think somebody further up to look scary but also liberating, and it is often this juxtaposition of two very different kind of bodily feelings. I was doing the Daring Way, I think it was, with a group of Nordic women once, and they said vulnerability feels, and I'll never forget this, vulnerability feels like coming out of the sauna naked and being about to jump in the North Sea. And that, I mean, they meant it literally. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what it is like. It's like that terror, exhilaration, like full body experience all at the same time. I was like, what an amazing metaphor. Right, last one. I grew up believing vulnerability was. I grew up believing vulnerability was. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Oh, kudos to Heather. Heather, can I dare ask what roughly what generation you're in? Are you a younger generation than some of us that are on the call? If you fancy it. If you don't want to answer, that's fine. Oh, 40. Okay. Interesting. So can you see how Heather is the exception to the rule here? And this does happen. For most of us, we haven't been brought up in households where it's okay to be vulnerable. I mean, I guess my household was, you can be vulnerable here, but whatever you do, don't do that outside of the house. And people like Heather have had this different upbringing where, you know, they might have seen vulnerability being role modeled by their parents. Some cultures, it's a bit different. And you know what, again, I think we're seeing a revolution in real time here. When I speak to 18, 19, 20-year-olds, it's like, oh, it's fine. Vulnerability is fine. What are you talking about? You know, the way that they'll answer that question is so different. But you see the rub. If we need to be vulnerable in the workplace to be a good leader, and we've been brought up to believe that it's weakness, that's a lot of unlearning that we need to do to be able to shift to it. Cool. And now we can go on to the next slide. And I guess this was just for the naysayers. There may not be any on this call, but for back in the day when I was struggling still to prove the role of vulnerability in the workplace, I was thinking, right, think about uncertainty, risk, emotional exposure, and how important that is, to that you wouldn't say no to needing any of these things on the slide, would you, in the workplace? You're like, well, absolutely, we need all those things. But in all of those things, uncertainty is present. And most of them, I think emotional exposure is present as well. There's a degree of risk in all of them. So you can start to see, you can make it very behavioral about the things that we need in the workplace. Okay, next slide. I was going to ask you this to see what your thoughts were first. So for me, vulnerability is absolutely critical to the diversity, equity and inclusion agenda. And I would love for you to have a think. Why do you think vulnerability is so critical to DE&I? I'd love to hear from a few of you. Again, just pop it in the chat box. Let's read a few of them. Yeah, Carissa, I hope I pronounced your name right, says it's critical to role model and have leaders demonstrating it. Absolutely. And again, it's really fresh in my mind. There's at the event this morning, they were talking about mental health actually, and how important it was just for leaders to role model caring for their own mental health, which requires vulnerability to do. They were also saying that someone was questioning somebody else, saying, "But we need so much, we need systemic change in the workplace." And I think it's Paul Nobel, the journalist, she's like, well, we do, but also individual leaders can just role model vulnerability, and that kind of small behavior, massive impact on people. I also think we need to vulnerability. Oh, we've got some more coming in. Thanks, Sarah. Yeah, I think that's really important. We often avoid having conversations about diversity, equity, and inclusion, or even with people that we don't quite understand, and it's risky to avoid having those conversations altogether. We're not going to make progress unless we can step into those conversations. Cassidy, absolutely, you have to be vulnerable in sharing that you don't have all the answers. We are all learning, we all have biases and things that we're working on. Love that. The only other one I would add is, well, actually, there's loads. I could be here all day, but there's one that I really want to land. And it was a quote from Tarana Burke. She said, "I don't believe your anti-racist proclamations unless your heart is engaged in Black lives." And what she was, and I've probably quoted that completely incorrectly, but what she was basically saying is, you can think of diversity, equity, and inclusion as a checklist, a doing thing, but for her, it's a feeling thing. It's like our hearts need to be in it as well, and we need to be, engaging in Black culture, and yeah, just getting our hearts involved, which is obviously a vulnerability piece too. Brilliant. Any questions on vulnerability before I move on? I will go on to the next slide. If any come through, I'll go back to it. Cool. So let's dig into trust a little bit. Okay, so I love this tool. I think this is one of the most actionable pieces in the whole of Dare to Lead. So courageous leaders know how to operationalize trust in their buildings, in their companies, in their businesses. And the problem with trust is it's a huge word, isn't it? And if I was like, say Sarah and I, something had gone wrong, and I'd be like, "Oh, Sarah, I don't trust you anymore," it would literally be like, yeah, like game over. And I imagine, well, I certainly would have been filled with so much shame. I wouldn't know where to start in trying to kind of repair that. And the whole point of this is to break trust down into manageable component parts, so that if something did go wrong in a relationship at work, which it will, because we're human, we're not perfect, we know how to rebuild that trust. And also, if we're starting new relationships or working on, say, a new pitch team, we can get intentional about building that trust from the very beginning. So rather than it being this big gauzy concept that's hard to pin down, it's like trust becomes something a lot more behavioral and a lot more manageable. So on this one, it's good to think of somebody in the workplace who you've got some mild trust issues with. Okay. And then you might be able to pinpoint what it is that's happening in that relationship that's causing that to happen. So the B is braving down the side, the eagle-eyed amongst you would have noticed. The B stands for boundaries. So when trust is present, people respect the boundaries. If people don't know what the boundaries are, they ask what those boundaries are. As an example, if I go to Deutsche Bank to do a presentation, I say, "Hey, am I allowed to swear here?" And often they'll go, no, please don't swear. It's like that is a way of me building trust. Like I'm trying to make sure I know what the boundaries are, so I don't accidentally, drop in an F-bomb when it's inappropriate for me to do so. The other thing about boundaries, which I think we forget sometimes, is that there needs to be, if someone transgresses those boundaries, something needs to happen. So it's like if you've got a toddler and you keep saying to the toddler, "You're not allowed to touch the stove, you're not allowed to touch the stove," and the toddler touches the stove, nothing happens. That actually decreases that toddler's trust in you as a caregiver, because it's like, well, you said that I can't do this, but I do it and nothing happens. I don't get it. And the same is true in the workplace. And I know for me, sometimes I'm so invested in being kind of the amiable, nice, easy to get on with leader, that if someone is constantly turning up late, I'm finding that really hard to call out and do something about. Or if somebody is making spelling mistakes in client-facing pieces of work, I'm like, oh God, I'm going to look like I'm micromanaging if I start pointing those things out. And so for me, this is a challenge, the boundaries one. And I think high-functioning teams tend to sit down together and agree what those boundaries are. They're co-created. So the B stands for boundaries. Please, if there's any questions as I'm speaking, pop them in the chat box. The R stands for reliability. So doing what you say you're going to do. And the most common slip up here is people overpromising. And I hear this a lot. And I'm one of these yes people. People don't want to say no. They're like, yeah, I can do that. I will do that. And often they overpromise. And actually, maybe they haven't got the skills to do it, or maybe they haven't got the time to do it. And you just watch out for those things, because they can really diminish trust in the workplace. The A stands for accountability. I think the best iteration of that is if things go wrong, you're willing to go, that was on me, hands up, that was on me, and I'm going to clean it up. Nothing decreases my trust more in the workplace than people refusing to kind of hold themselves accountable when things have gone wrong. If someone just says, yeah, that meeting was a mess up and it's on me and I didn't do this and I'm going to sort it out. It's like, for me, that's just, there's no trust issue there. But if a meeting goes wrong and no one will put their hands up, it causes issues for me. What I'll do is I'll come back to the questions when I've gone through all of them. The V stands for vault or confidentiality. So if you're told things in confidence, you keep them confidential. And the thing is, if Louise has told me something in confidence and then I am sharing that over here with Sarah, Louise doesn't need to even hear that, but Sarah sees me sharing something about Louise, that's going to break trust in that relationship, because she's going to see me as somebody who doesn't maintain the vault. Integrity is, I think the best way to think about integrity is about honoring your values. It's like walking the talk. So if I say that I'm about this and this is important to me, do I actually live and breathe that on a day-to-day basis? And honestly speaking, there's a lot of advertising agencies in London that say they're doing a really good job on diversity, equity, inclusion. I coach in some of those organizations, they're really not. For me, it's a trust issue, because they're not living in their integrity. Non-judgment, this is just about staying out of judgment. So can you ask for what you need, or can you ask for help without fear of judgment? You know, can you mess up without feeling that people are going to kind of finger point and judge you? And that links really closely with generosity. This is a big thorny topic that we could spend a long time talking about, but the way Brené talks about it, she asks you, do you believe that people are doing the best that they can? And people tend to fall into two banks of how they answer that. Some people are like, hell no, people aren't doing the best that they can. And then there's another group of people that are like, yeah, maybe. I know it's a bit of a corny thing to say, but I think that they might be. And ultimately, she comes to the conclusion that, who knows, we can't actually know, but we do know that when we believe that people are doing the best that they can, it does seem to build trust, and it does seem to make our lives easier. And it's not that it makes you all soft and fluffy. Sometimes it helps you to make really tough decisions. So say I've got Paolo, making up names, in my team. He is struggling to meet his objectives. We have given him training. We have been really clear about his objectives. We've given him coaching, but we've done all the stuff. Is he doing the best that he can do? Well, actually, he's in the wrong job. If that's the best that he can do with all of this support and help, there's something wrong about the role and we need to move him. And I've got an example of that really early in my career. And, you know, the guy that I moved into a different job, I moved him into the search function, which at the time was like not a very popular decision, or not a very kind of high earning part of the advertising agency I worked in. Honestly, he's now got a massively successful search company. He's probably a millionaire. But he was just in the wrong job. Okay, so hopefully you can go through this and then think, that person I've got a bit of a funny relationship with at the moment, this is what's going on there. And then you might think, okay, if it's because of, say, vault, confidentiality, I've heard them talking about other people when they shouldn't be. It's like, well, what can I do about that? Maybe there's a courageous conversation to go and have that will help you address that. Let me just go to the question. Oh, I don't know if I understand the question, Anik. How do you deal with the boundaries issue? The example of someone keeps coming late. How do you set? I find it tricky. I mean, I just want to acknowledge that I struggle with it as well. I think it's important for the groups to, like teams, to agree their own boundaries. So the kind of time that we say arrive for a meeting or come in at, it is helpful if everybody's contributed to that. However, there's an example in Dare to Lead where there's a teacher that's using her mobile phone in the classroom, and anyway, it transpires that her mum's sick, and that's why she's using the mobile phone. So I think there's then the piece of, I noticed that you're not adhering to our boundaries. I noticed you're not coming in at 9:30 as an example. What's going on there? And trying to understand what's going on. And being able to say it's not okay. We've all made the agreement that we're going to come in at 9:30 every day. It's not okay that you're coming in here at 10 o'clock, because the impact that you're having on the team is that you're sending the message that it's okay to come in at 10 o'clock, and that's not okay. But obviously through having that conversation, you might find that something else sits underneath it. So the teacher example in Dare to Lead, she ends up, the head teacher says, you know, it's not okay to be on your phone in your classroom. Your mum's sick. It's okay to be concerned about your mum. Let's find a solution whereby, you know, you have time out the classroom with a supply teacher in the classroom so that you can do that, or leave your phone with somebody in the front office who can come and get you if there is a message. So they kind of worked ways around it, but being really clear as kind. It's not okay to do this. Oh, it's horrible though, isn't it? It's really, really horrible. You can use this as an audit tool as well. So you can literally get a group of people, a team together. And so I did this with an HR consultancy recently, and I said, right, score how well your team do on boundaries, reliability, blah, 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 blah. And then we put all the numbers up on the wall and we talked about them. And it was so interesting because you could go, right, this is where we're doing well as a team. This is where we're doing less well. So therefore, what do we want to do differently? And then also you find that there's, I've forgotten the mathematical term for it, but there's a bigger range of numbers for some than others. And this HR consultancy I was working with, it was on volts. The senior people was giving it really high scores and the junior people were giving it really low scores. And we were like, oh, what's going on there? Let's dig into it. And it transpired that the senior people were kind of going out to the companies, their clients, doing their HR stuff, coming back, and like on the shop floor, as it were, talking about what had happened in that company, whereas they thought they were doing that because of trust in the team, whereas the junior people's experience of that was, you're sharing things that aren't ours to hear. We don't want to hear this. And so they created a shift in their structure and their process where they almost had supervision sessions when they came back from difficult HR meetings, and then their trust kind of built as an organization. So this is a kind of ready to go tool that you can use with your teams to do an audit. Did anybody, I'm seeing what's going on in the chat box. Oh, brilliant. Thanks, Sarah. That's a really good, I love Gretchen Rubin. She's great. Any other questions on trust? Can you see how you could use this as an auditing tool? Yeah. I can only see Anik now nodding. So you can use it as an auditing tool, or if trust is broken down in a particular relationship, you can use it to have a conversation with that person about what's going on and what needs to be amended. You can use it if you're setting up a new team to say, right, let's agree with each other what the boundaries are. Let's agree what reliability looks like in this team. And you go through it and you actually get a list of behaviors right from the beginning that you all agree to. And then back to your question, Anik, I think if that's been done, it's so much easier. If the boundaries are clear, it's so much easier to then circle back and say, look, we agreed this and you're doing this. It's not okay. Cool. The other thing about trust, is it on the next slide or not? Go to the next slide. That's cool. The other thing about trust is to remember that it's like the marble jar. It's like the big sweeping gestures, and this is John Gottman's work. Big sweeping gestures don't tend to build trust in organizations. What does build trust are those really small behaviors on a day-to-day basis. So the example John Gottman often gives is that he's about to go to bed, he's really nearly finished his book and he wants to get into bed and finish it, and he sees that his wife is brushing her hair and looking really sad, and he's like, that is a kind of a moment of connection where you can choose. Either I put a marble in the marble jar by, you know, putting my book down and saying, hey, what's wrong, love? Or I take a marble out of the marble jar by ignoring that and getting on with reading my book. So yeah, know that trust is built in those smallest of moments. And obviously trust is critical to the DEI agenda as well. So I was going to ask, why do you think that might be? Why do you think trust is critical to the DEI agenda? Anybody? Oh, well done, Annie. You trust, you can build better. Yeah, I think that's really true. People are better able to communicate, aren't they, when there's trust? Absolutely. And we talk a lot about bringing your full self to work. If you don't work in a culture of trust, you're not going to feel safe bringing your full self to work. So all of that. I also think we talk a lot about courageous conversations and brave spaces at the Hobbs consultancy. So it's not about safe spaces, it's about brave spaces where people can really open up and have these courageous conversations, but you really need a container of trust for people to feel able to do that. Alex says we need to face our bias and discover who we truly are to make change and build equity. Absolutely. And then there's a self-trust piece in there as well, I think, Alex. If we're going to do that, we need to trust ourselves as we move through that process. Perfect. Great. Do you want to move on again? I'm only giving you a tiny flavour of all of these things. It's like a whistle-stop tour. There's a full curriculum of 3 days that sits behind it all. Move on again, and I think I've got time really quickly. Keep going. I'm not going to do anything on operationalising values. Go on to resilience. I promised you a really quick tool to use on resilience. It's this one. So the Dare to Lead full curriculum teaches you a process like that. If you fall on your face, it teaches you how to pick yourself back up again. But there's one really little part of that that's a hack that I wanted to teach you. So when difficult things happen to us, what happens in our brain is our brains are meaning-making machines, and our brains scramble to make up a story about what's happening in that moment. So say I go to Dubai on a business trip, and I get home, and as I get home, my husband literally walks out the door with his running shoes on. I would make up the story that my husband prefers running to me, that he's not missed me. We're, you know, like probably within a few minutes could get to, oh, we're bound to get divorced and I'm going to be living on my own underneath Waterloo Bridge. I'd probably go down that catastrophizing pretty quickly. The crazy thing is, the story you make up in your head, it may or may not be true, but you get a dopamine hit for making up that story. And I think it's to do with evolutionary psychology and the fact that we're wired for survival. We need to make sense of the kind of big bad world and to go, well, I'm safe, I'm not safe. As soon as we've made sense of situations, we get a dopamine hit. But what Brené encourages us to do is to really make those stories conscious. So if you're in conflict with somebody, literally writing down the story I'm making up right now is this. And then as soon as you write it down and look at it, it almost takes the charge out of it. And also you're able to look at it in a bit more of a rational way and go, hold on, this doesn't seem right. My husband is a very kind, loving man. Our marriage is really safe and secure. Maybe he's just training for the marathon he's got next weekend and I should stop, panicking about this. The story that Brené tells in Dare to Lead, there's one where somebody kind of leaves the meeting and giving an eye roll. And what Brené encourages you to do, the story I'm making up right now is, I don't know, Clarissa is irritated with me and I've messed up in the meeting. Well, if that is the story, maybe it's worth going knocking on Clarissa's office, or giving her a call is probably more likely these days, and saying, like, you looked annoyed with me at the end of that meeting. I'm just wanting to check in with you. Did something happen? And then it gives Clarissa the opportunity to respond to that. But what a lot of us do is we make up these stories without realizing. And then we live our lives as though those stories were true. So my husband goes out running. I make up the story that he's, irritated with me. He likes his running more than me. I could very unconsciously then go, well, do you know what? Sod him. I forgot to ask Sarah if I could swear, actually. Hope I haven't offended anyone. I'm going to go out with my mates tonight. So he gets back from running. I've already gone out with my mates, and those little actions that you can just see it unraveling and unraveling over time. So when something tricky next happens to you and you feel a bit overwhelmed with emotion, see if you can stop yourself and just think, right, what is the story I'm making up right now? Write it down, or maybe think of something that's difficult that's happened to you in the past couple of weeks and think, actually, in that moment, what was the story I was making up? Write it down and then think, what's true in here and what have I made up? Brené talks about conspiracies and confabulations. Conspiracies is when you've got a limited data points and you've filled in the gaps, and confabulations are lies told honestly. It's like when you really believe that to be true. And where this becomes revolutionary is if you do this consistently over time, you start to recognize patterns in the stories you make up. So mine, and it feels vulnerable to share this, but mine are always about rejection, always. And Brené says that hers are always about imperfectly balancing her professional life with her family life and being not good enough and perfectionism. Once you can recognize those, those are what psychologists would call your life scripts, and you can really start to make huge change in your life based on them. But for now, when something tough happens, just write down the story you're making up. Sarah, you said you use this one sometimes, don't you? Yeah, there you go.
Yeah, this one, I love this. It definitely helps just kind of be an extra check on something before I'm about to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe you're doing this, or, whatever. It definitely just brings me back to reality. Maybe this little story.
And there's something powerful about writing it down, I think, because it can be an unconscious behavioral driver in your head, but making it conscious and then going, is this true, and do I want to live as though this was true is powerful. Cool. Okay, let's see what's next. I think we're going to wrap things up. Obviously you need to be resilient with D&I. You will get it wrong, but I won't dig into that now. I'm really aware, as I said, this has been a whistle-stop tour, but I've just tried to give you 2 or 3 of the key learnings so that you really get value from having attended this hour. I run this as 3-day workshops as well. We're doing it in person in London. The rates are on there and the email address. It's normally held in a workspace near Liverpool Street. And it's the whole Dare to Lead curriculum. So there's videos of Brené, I'll be facilitating, and it uses a teach, process, share approach. So I teach you about the research, you process what that means for your leadership, and then you share it with other leaders so as to learn. And I think I hand back to you now, Sarah.
Yeah, thanks so much. Kate, can you go to the next slide? So that's one great opportunity. If you guys want to dig deeper into this, one other one, just to really build the muscle of vulnerability and operate from a place of self-awareness, like I was saying, instead of self-protection. It's really important to trust and accept yourself, but that takes a lot of time, a safe space where you can reflect and figure these things out. So we offer, this is an opportunity this June in Mallorca. It's a wellness retreat for women executives. And I know you all are busy and stressed. So here we really just take care of everything so that you can truly relax. And once you're in a state of relaxation, then we help you to get clarity on what those things are that you want to work on. You can go to the next slide, Kate. We help you work on what those things are that you want in your life. So where am I today, and what am I trying to get to, and what's kind of holding me back between those things? So what are the limiting beliefs, some of the things that we talked about today, and really letting those things go, and then helping you to heal so that you are actually able to let those go. Because what I've seen a lot of people do is, they're meditating, they're journaling, they're listening to all the podcasts, reading all the books, but they're they're still repeating those patterns. And that's why healing is so important. And in order to do that, you really need that safe space. So at this retreat, you'll have the support of other women executives, and you also have professional coaches who will guide you along that process. And then at the end, you'll also have executive coaching. So I want to make sure that you don't just have this amazing experience, you also are set up for success once you get home, because it's very different to, have this clarity when you're in a paradise like Mallorca. But once you get home, I really want to make sure that you're able to integrate this successfully. So you'll have executive coaching throughout, and you can go to the next slide, Kate. And this is the amazing place that we'll be staying at. So this is actually a 14th century monastery that was converted into this just true sanctuary for retreats. I mean, all the pictures through the entire presentation were all from Mallorca and from the properties. So you can kind of get a little bit of flavor for what to expect. And you can go to the next one. And also, so you'll have a private chef. This is just kind of, there's some of the nice sunsets. It's just absolutely stunning, so peaceful. So if you are interested in joining, I hope that you'll send me a message, or you can go to impactury.com/Mallorca. And one thing that for coming to this session today, if you schedule a coffee chat with me, if you schedule it today for the end of this week, then you will get a free room upgrade once you reserve your spot for the retreat. So anyway, this will help you to really just reach that full potential. So whatever it is that your dream is, I just hope you know that you are the key, and no one has your unique gifts. And, those are just waiting to inspire others and can really change lives. So thank you so much for coming today. And also, as you're thinking about these things, maybe some things will come up for you later after the event. I just want to encourage you to kind of be gentle with yourself after, talking about vulnerability and everything. So here's our contact information. You can connect with me on LinkedIn, Instagram, and also if you end up implementing any of these things, please tag us on Instagram, LinkedIn, just send a message. I love to hear these things, and it's also just really inspiring for other people to hear. And also, if you want to reach out to Roxanne, here is her contact information as well. And yeah, you can sign up for her course too if you want to really dig into this stuff. So thanks again. We'll be here for the next few minutes if you have any more questions. Thank you. And thanks, Roxanne.
Thank you. That was fun. Thank you.